Thank you for downloading this Real Agriculture podcast. Next thing you know the next thing. Next is Now is a short podcast discussing agriculture's emerging next-gen tech and trends as they're happening in our industry. Next is Now, presented by GFL Ag. Listen where you get your podcasts today.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME, broadcasting across Saskatchewan. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com and the host of the RealAg Radio podcast. Hope you had yourself a great week. We've got lots to discuss here today on the program and really looking forward to it as we saw some wintry weather very much return to the province of Saskatchewan this week. Some of the photos from some of the vehicles I saw buried in drifts completely in parts of Saskatchewan, especially the Saskatoon airport. Could you imagine returning from a flight? Like, you just spent like 2 weeks in Mexico, you get back to Saskatoon, you're so excited to be home, and then you got to go to Home Depot and buy a shovel to try to unbury. Have you ever had the experience where you forget where you parked? That'd be even compounded by the fact that you can't find your vehicle because it's actually in a drift. I'm pretty sure we parked here, and there's just a big mound of snow. So it is a little bit more wintry this week in Saskatchewan. We'll take the moisture in, indeed. Like, keep it coming is actually what probably some of the message is from many of you. Okay, today on RealAg on the Weekend, we're going to look at how beef producers in the country are looking at the year ahead a little bit different than some of their broadacre farmer peers. We'll look at that from our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. We're also going to have a product spotlight with SaskCanola. Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture will be stopping by. He is going to talk about what some of the highlights for him from this week's crops convention that happened in Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's Canada Grains Council and the Canola Council of Canada, their annual meeting. So Kelvin was on the ground in Winnipeg, and he'll talk about that. And then they've got a sneak peek at a new episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast dropping next week. I'll give you a bit of a sneak peek. It is about high-performing, peak-performing cultures, which is very important if you're running a smooth operating farming company. You need to have a good culture, so we'll talk about that here today on the program. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms, or you are very, very more than welcome, the more the merrier actually, to call the RealAg feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. Let's dive in right now to some data around our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index related to future farm financial performance. And as you have been hearing me say on the show, there is definitely some concern out there broadly with farmers and ranchers when it comes to future farm financial performance. Now, overall, the future farm financial performance is like in the high 60s out of 200. So it's 100 is neutral. If you're in the 60s, you're pretty pessimistic about your future farm financial performance. So looking ahead, do you think that a year from now your operation will be better off financially, worse off, or just about the same? Okay, so people feeling worse off than today. And we talked about the markets earlier. I think it's self-explanatory as to the why. Now, there is a sector or a group of agriculture that may be thinking a little bit differently, though, about this, and that's the livestock sector, okay? So we've separated out, do you have primarily crops, primarily livestock, or both crops and livestock? Okay, so you're a mixed farm. Here's what's interesting. If you're primarily crops, okay, so you're a row cropper or you're a broadacre farmer, you're currently looking at your future farm financial performance at 60. Okay? Now, the range since September of 22, then the 60 is a low. The highest we ever got actually is going back only to October, where it was 86. So that we've dropped from 86 to 60 in 3 months, because this data is from January. If we look at primarily livestock, it's actually 98. It's neutral. Now, the range there since September of 22, you'd have to go back to March of 23, where it was a 119. Okay, it did get as low as 79 in July, so it fell off fairly quickly from that March high. Was 102 in October, and this past January, like I mentioned, was 98. So primarily livestock, 98, essentially neutral compared to primarily crops at 60. If we look at both crops and livestock, this is a mixed operation, 75. Okay, and the range has been anywhere from 75, which is the low, all the way to 96, and that 96 was back a year ago, January of 2023. So primarily livestock feeling better about their future farm financial performance than the croppers, and I think that's what we would assume, but it's nice to have the data that does showcase that. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper into the livestock and the why of this a little bit. So what we've done is we've separated out supply managed versus non-supply managed in the livestock sector. So supply managed is turkey, chicken, of course we have dairy, okay? And then there's all the exportable commodities. So non-supply managed is 74 on future farm financial performance. Supply managed is 86. Now, also I want to point out this, and this is also what we would expect. The future farm financial performance since July is virtually unchanged for supply managed commodities. 84, 86, and 86. Okay, it really has not moved. The outlook really hasn't changed when it comes to future farm financial performance. When we look at the non-supply managed commodities, where these are the exportable commodities like beef and pork, for example, there's more volatility. There's a little bit more bouncing around. It's been 83, 95, and now down to 74. So back in October, non-supply managed commodities or livestock producers felt better about their future farm financial performance than the supply managed commodities. But that has changed in January. In January, non-supply managed is 74, supply managed is 86. Okay, so what else can we tell you about the livestock as it applies to financial performance? Well, some of this also ties to the fact of confidence in marketing livestock. Okay, so we asked some marketing questions, as you know. So how confident are you in marketing your livestock today compared to a year ago? From an index perspective, out of 200, it's a 119.6. Now remember that when it comes to the broader, all farmers and ranchers, the confidence number is down at 75. So livestock producers clearly more confident in marketing their livestock right now than their cropping peers. What we can also say to you is outlook on livestock markets. Okay, so which best describes your outlook on livestock margins? And this is the gross livestock. So this is all livestock margins. Okay, so this is beef and pork and dairy and lamb and everything. Okay, now when it comes to all the aggregate, all farmers, the number there was about 95, it looks like. Okay. When we look at just livestock, the outlook on livestock margins is a 152.8. Livestock producers feeling very strong about the direction of the livestock markets, and that's reflected also in their margins here based on this data from January. 76% of livestock producers said they feel positive margins for livestock in the year ahead, whereas 23.6% said negative margins for livestock in the year ahead. And if you look at the direction that we have seen from the commodities like corn and wheat, obviously that's bad or negative for crop farmers, but it is some feed cost relief for livestock producers. And also we've seen some pretty strong markets overall when it comes to things like some of the livestock prices out there. So yeah, definitely, and in that non-supply managed category of ours, definitely a pretty heavy weighting towards beef. And, we're looking at feeder cattle this fall that could be, once again, setting some pretty record prices when it comes to what, and you know what, for the rancher, it's a long time coming. And, sustained profits will, along with some rain and a nice weather pattern, will eventually lead us to not only a market signal, but the capability to actually maybe retain more of those females and start to think about maybe expanding that cow herd just a little bit. So there's some data, Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index related to livestock producers. Would be very curious what your thoughts are on this, especially as it pertains to what questions would you like answered going forward, right? I've got lots of thoughts, and I've got lots of questions in terms of when we get to April, when we do our next intake here in a few weeks for the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. But if you have some things that you I really wonder if this is what's driving farmer decision-making, or this is what I'm thinking of my farm. I wonder if more people aren't under the same impression or dealing with the same constraints or barriers. Please reach out. Of course, the email is shaney@realagriculture.com, and the RealAg feedback line is 855-776-6147. That's the beauty of Real Agri Studies, is we get out of the, well, here's what I think, or here's my perception, or here's what I'm assuming, and this is the farmer speaking with one voice, not necessarily a unified voice or everybody thinking the same, but it does allow us to better understand what you are dealing with, and I think that's important for the rest of the industry. And also we can learn from each other as well, right? If you are down on your current farm financial performance, you can see that you got a lot of you're in welcome company. There's a lot of people struggling right now with that current farm financial performance indeed. But like we just heard, the livestock sector feeling a little bit better right now about themselves here in 24 than some of their cropping peers indeed. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll have more of RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
The following is a paid-for product spotlight by SaskCanola.
I am Lindsay Smith, and joining me now is Kaeley Kindrachuk. She's the Agronomy Extension Specialist with SaskCanola. Today, we are going to talk about, as we mentioned, an exciting thing, top-notch farming trials. Tell me about these trials. What is this all about?
So top-notch farming trials are SaskCanola's new on-farm field-scale research program. This program is meant to answer questions that farmers and or agronomists might have that are specific to their farm or operation or their area. These trials they're simple to implement, or we design them to be simple to implement, but they're also replicated and randomized to ensure that we account for any field variability and we receive meaningful data in the end.
Well, I was going to say, that's a key part, is that these are field scale, which can sometimes be daunting, but you are making it in such a way that, farmers who want to participate or agronomists who want to participate, making it as easy as possible, but still maintaining the integrity of the study.
Absolutely. Yeah, we recognize that there's an element to field scale trials that makes it a little bit more difficult than when we start having a lot of variables within the small plot trials. So we wanted to take some of that out, make it easier for the growers to seed or spray, whatever the protocol may be, easy for agronomists to collect the data, yet the information that is received at the end is quite usable for the farmer.
I want to talk about some of the benefits that those that participate are going to be able to garner from these. But before I do that, what kind of trials are we talking about? Is this, big picture, brand new sort of ideas that have never been done? Are these individual questions that farmers came to SaskCanola and said, I need to know about this? How did you sort of decide what's going to go into these top-notch trials?
So kind of a little bit of all of the above. We do seek the input and ideas for these trials all year long. So if a farmer is seeding in May and they think, oh, hey, this would be a great trial, they can text or email us and we can put it on the list for the future. The ideas that we receive the most requests for, though, are likely what we will be writing protocols on. And we do consult with board members or other growers throughout the year to make sure that we're kind of on the right track with what farmers are looking for. We do a lot of work with the other crop commissions, and then Christiane Catelier with Indian Head Agricultural Research Foundation and Kayla Slind with Western Applied Research Corporation to help guide these programs and manage some of these programs for us.
For farmers who are interested, or agronomists who are interested, what sort of benefits would you say those that participate can sort of garner from these trials as maybe incentive to take part?
So one of the biggest benefits to joining this program is that farmers can conduct a research trial on their own land using their own equipment with many of their existing practices. They will have access to their agronomist to help with the data collection and also a research expert, so Christiane or Kayla. We also will be doing the statistical analysis of the data afterwards, and the farmer cooperators will receive a report back, which will help them with future decision making. And lastly, they get to join a network of farmers and agronomists who are interested in on-farm research, be invited to join a joint field tour between all of the participating Sask crop commissions, and an invitation-only results banquet. So they gain primary access to the results of other on-farm field scale trials in Saskatchewan as well.
Very cool. Okay, so now to really get excited about this, because of course there are a couple months before we'll hit the field, especially when you're still digging out from that snowfall. But for those who are interested, who want to do this, what trials are already sort of getting hammered out as far as protocols? What might some of the topics look like this year?
So interested farmers for this year can choose to participate in one or all four of the protocols that we're going to be offering. So we're going to be looking at foliar applied nitrogen fixing biological products, seeding rates, enhanced efficiency nitrogen fertilizers, and split nitrogen or top-up nitrogen applications.
Okay, all of those I would say are pretty popular topics, so I can see how as a group you sort of nailed it down to those ones. Now, for those who would agree with that statement and say, yep, absolutely, that's something I want to be a part of, where can they go to find more information or to sign up?
So we have information on the protocols and the sign-up form on SaskCanola.com. So we're still accepting sign-ups for the 2024 season. And then I would also encourage interested farmers or agronomists to sign up with any of the other Saskatchewan crop commissions for their programs. I know Sask Wheat is still looking for participants for their Wheatwise program. And what's really cool about what we do, too, is that SaskCanola and Sask Wheat have been working very closely together to offer some of these protocols as joint protocols. So if farmers are interested in canola, they can also look at it in wheat as well and have a look at the differences between the two crops and the protocols.
Kaeley, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This is pretty exciting. I can't wait to see what farmers learn in 2024.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
We'll be back with more of RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops.
It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com, the Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
And welcome back to RealAg on the weekend. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. Joining me right now is Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture.com. Hey, Kelvin, how's it going?
Doing well here, Sean. Hope everyone's having a good weekend.
Yeah, definitely some snow has fallen in Western Canada here this past week, which is much needed. So I think everyone's feeling a little bit chipper right now, maybe compared to a couple weeks ago. Okay, so this week you were at Crops Convention in Winnipeg. This is the Canada Grains Council and the Canola Council of Canada having their joint meeting. Always a pretty good agenda. What were some of your takeaways from this week?
I think there were a few different themes. First of all, it was good to see everybody in one room. It's a lot of our connections in the industry when it comes to companies that, first farm organizations. You mentioned the Canola Council and all of the different canola groups, provincial organizations, as well the Canada Grains Council, which represents really stakeholders throughout the entire grain value chain. So it was good to see everybody, first of all. And I would say the theme for the conference this year was growing inspiration. And I guess it depends on how you define inspiring. There's a lot of challenges that our industry is, or different stakeholders in our industry are facing right now. So in some ways that is motivating for action and for finding solutions. But whether you look at the trade front, whether you look at the political front or the economic front right now, there are a lot of challenges, and there were speakers talking about all of these different aspects. For example, Emily Rees is the president and CEO of CropLife International based in Brussels. She was in Winnipeg this week, fresh from the WTO ministerial meeting in Abu Dhabi last week, and she talked about some of the challenges there in terms of not much progress happening at the WTO and just countries around the world trending towards protectionism. And part of that has to do with the election cycle. And I didn't realize this, but if you look around the world, she said over 60% of the world's population, or countries where over 60% of the world's population lives, are going to the polls in 2024. So there's a lot of political promises and just noise, things being said and promised, whether they'll actually happen, but a lot of talk, rhetoric right now when it comes to the political uncertainty, and that impacts our industry in many ways.
Well, just look at the CUSMA or USMCA agreement alone. We've got Mexico this year, we've got the US this year, and Canada, it could be this year, but it also has to happen sometime in 25 for sure. So just our major trading partners alone are going through it.
Yeah, exactly. And so and there too, the U.S., it's been well documented, is trending towards certainly focusing on creating jobs domestically and creating opportunities domestically, taking away some of the focus off of trading with other countries. And the current administration, the Biden administration, has continued that trend from the previous Trump administration. And we, of course, have candidate Trump talking about this 10% tariff or potentially matching tariffs that any other country has and those types of things. aren't good news in terms of opening up trade in our export-focused agriculture sector. Also look at India. India is another major country that has an election coming up here, and they have some major farmer protests happening again. And you look at India as a market for Canadian crops, pulses in particular, and as well in the fertilizer market. India is a big player too. So another example in Europe as well. There's all kinds of course, the farmer protests there have been all over our social media feeds over the last number of weeks, and so just a lot of political pressure and uncertainty. In a lot of these cases, farmers actually. This is another point that was brought up this week at Crops Convention. Farmers are punching above their weight in terms of political influence in a lot of countries around the world right now, which made me reflect on Canada. And we don't. I don't know if you can make the same argument in Canada as in the U.S. or India or in some of these European countries where there are major protests happening.
Yeah, that is fair. Now we've been talking a lot about how farmers are feeling negative about their current and future financial performance through our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. What sense are you getting from industry? Because it all flows, it's all connected, right? If the farmer's not spending money, companies in the value chain are going to struggle. They're not insulated whatsoever. So I would have to think there's a lot of people in that room a little bit concerned as well.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's. I think industry has maybe been ahead of the curve on this and been quite cautious, and so I don't know whether. Yeah. I think there's been a lot of preparation for that ahead of time, and so ultimately we are in an industry. People need to eat, and food is always going to be in demand. The fundamentals of agriculture globally are still strong in the medium to long term. So I think that is also on the minds of a lot of decision makers when it comes to how they support farmers and bring solutions forward for farmers and that type of thing.
Was there much talk about the significance to at which the farmers undersold on 23 and 24 crop? Because that I spoke at a couple events this week, and I'll tell you that was very much hit home for me. But if I combine that with being at Commodity Classic last week, U.S. there's a lot of corn still unsold, and Canada there's a lot of canola, for example, unsold. And people talking a lot about it, and there's some holders regret, as I would put it out there. And it's people thinking about it.
This hits home for me. This is a little bit personal.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah. But I do think it's more than anecdotal. I think if you talk to the companies that have canola crush plants, or even the railways, railways had a presence as well at the Crops Convention this week, and talking to some of their people, they also are expecting some above normal, or they would say that demand during the winter months has been slower than they expected based on how much crop is still on farm, and they're expecting that crop to come in the coming months here. But it's a matter of road restrictions and interfering with planting timing, and of course cash flow is ultimately something that will force farmers to deliver at some point in many cases. But I do think that sentiment is out there, that there's still farmers were hoping, I think in general, we were hoping that we would see the price cycle of a year or two ago in terms of seasonality, and it's kind of been the inverse in 2023, 24.
There's always political presentations and a component to that crops convention. This year there was a political panel. What were some of the messages there? Is it basically everyone just waiting for a conservative change in government, or are people not ruling out the Liberals just quite yet?
No, I would say that there's a lot of discussion. I've noticed it in the last couple of weeks, and including at Crops Convention this week, of people starting to kind of create different scenarios. What does a conservative government look like? What does the first 100 days look like? What does the first term look like in terms of the first budget? What would all be included or not included in a conservative budget? So just based on the polling, and we had David Hurley, who is a well-known Liberal pollster, host of a well-known podcast on current affairs in Canada. He was one of the panel, or hosted the panel on Thursday. I would say there's not a lot of expectation of a Liberal turnaround here. So a lot of, and this ties in with what we talked about earlier in terms of there being political uncertainty for our industry. What happens to the clean fuel regulations, which Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, has frequently referred to as a second carbon tax? This is the same policy as similar policy is what's driving a lot of demand for the new canola crush capacity in Saskatchewan, including it's also south of the border. What happens to this clean fuel regulation and all the renewable diesel incentives and different structures in place to drive demand for that? What happens to that if there's a change in administration south of the border later this year? That's where some of this political uncertainty certainly comes into our industry and demand for the crops that we grow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's political risk, right?
Yeah.
When you're a company and you're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a plant, and when you get sort of concerned that a government change could change the policy or the support, whether that's financial or regulatory or just emotional support, those things that capital gets skittish.
Exactly, and that nervousness was palpable, I would say.
Okay.
Sitting across the table from people involved in the canola industry at lunch one of the days this week, that's a real concern. What happens to some of the government policies that have driven demand or forecasted demand for canola? What happens if all of a sudden there's a change in that government policy?
Yeah. Interesting. Hey, so you're farming in southern Manitoba in Altona. How close are you, do you think, to putting seed in the ground? You got some snow again, so it's pushed out?
Yeah, I would say the snow that we got this week, well, last weekend we received a little bit, not nearly as much as Saskatchewan received, but we got another storm came through on Wednesday, and yeah, it's a lot whiter out today than it was a week ago, and I would say it feels like it's maybe on track for more of a normal spring. I would say we're on track for late April, like normal at this point.
Good stuff. Well, hey, Kelvin, thanks a lot for joining us here today for RealAg on the Weekend.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, we're going to be right back here on RealAg on the Weekend. You're listening, of course, to 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Next week at RealAgriculture.com, we've got a new episode of our Mind Your Farm Business podcast that's going to be released. The Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I have a discussion. We talk about peak performance culture. Now, the culture of your organization is very, very important to its success. And as we get, really close to seeding and planting time, this becomes something that really needs to be in your focus to make sure your group is working at that peak level. Culture, a big part of it. Here's Dave Mitchell. What is culture and why is it important?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question and one that has kind of evaded the grasp of a lot of organizations because they hear about it. It's one of those buzzwords that people love to throw around, right? We got to work on our culture. We have a very strong culture. But when you actually sit down with executives and ask them, well, how would you define your culture and what evidence would you provide to support that definition? They often really struggle. So it's one of those things that people are happy to throw around, but have a really difficult time really explaining. So what I endeavored to do, I wrote a book, Peak Performance Culture, the 5 Metrics of Organizational Excellence. I decided, because I've been exposed to a wide variety of industries and sizes and types of organizations, I'm going to try to create a dashboard for what culture actually is and how you would measure it, how you would quantify it, how you could truly define it and set goals around enhancing that. So that was the purpose of that book, and I do a lot of work with my clients on culture building. So how would I describe culture? I think, first of all, every organization has a culture. The question is it intentional or accidental? And most companies that even claim to be intentional about their culture tend to have one that's more accidental because of the aforementioned problems. I don't really know what culture is, so how can I be intentional about building it? So for farms, I grew up in an agricultural industry. My hometown was 1,500 people. It's now down to 1,200 people in the Midwest here in the United States. Like you said, farms, certainly back in my day, growing up, they were more typically all modest farm-oriented enterprises. Increasingly, even in that rural area that I grew up, they're being gobbled up and expanded, and now they're a bit larger in scope, and some quite large. But even if it's a small family-owned farm, you have attitudes, you have approaches, you have ways that you interact with each other, what your philosophies are with managing any employees that you might have, including family members. You have relationships with your suppliers and vendors and the people that provide you with the materials and the equipment that you need to farm, as well as the people that you sell your products to. So the 5 metrics, and we can certainly start to talk about those individually, are ways of identifying these behaviors and approaches and practices and understanding how collectively they create your organization's culture.
Even in sports, we hear this all the time. There's been in college football, there's been a ton of coaches moving all over the place, and they do the press conference, and what's the very first thing they say? Oh, we're going to change the culture around here, right? Like we do throw it around. It is kind of like a poker chip we just carry around with us, and we throw it around and just hope there's no follow-ups. Like, what do you mean by that? Well, yeah, that's yeah. Like, well,
yeah. The funny part about that is, we're going to build a culture here. What a culture is I'm going to talk about it in very technical terms, but the reality is it's the collective behaviors of everybody that works for you and trying to unite those into like a common mentality. And so you can imagine on a football roster with, I don't even know how many is in a college football roster, but let's say 60 kids, and they are kids, 18 to 22 years old. When you say, I'm going to come in here and build a culture, that means you're going to somehow unify teenagers largely around one particular ideology, one school of thought. So it's a great soundbite at the press conference, but the proof will be 3 to 4 years into that process if that culture is starting to.
Like I mentioned, that is an excerpt from the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, a new episode that is dropping next week. You can find more about this by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com, or you can find the Mind Your Farm Business podcast wherever you get your podcast. You're really going to enjoy that one because, as somebody that has worked for Disney, consults with companies of all shapes and sizes, really across the world, Dave, a great resource when it comes to what is culture? How do you build it? How do you manage it? How do you massage it, take care of it? And what is in your control and what's out of your control. So I think you're really going to enjoy that conversation. I think one of the mistakes, though, that people make is that, that the culture thing I think that's kind of a big company thing. Like, Fortune 500, even just the large companies. But even if you're a family farm and it's only family members that are working the operation, the culture plays a big role. So I think all shapes and sizes of farms are going to enjoy this episode with Dave Mitchell. If you have any feedback on today's show of RealAg on the weekend, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, or you can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. I've been your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Encourage you to check out our website over the weekend, all the things that did not end up on the show. There's a lot of news right now in the world of agriculture. Thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.